Like to welcome
This call is now
Dr.
being
Anjana
recorded.
Krishnamurthy sir and Sunanda ma'am, and also the speaker of the day, ma'am Sangeeta ma'am, who is a cloud security architect from IBM. Welcome everyone. Now I request Anjan sir to speak a few words before we begin the session.
Okay, so very good afternoon to all of you here who are present here, and I welcome all of you for this particular session. This is a valedictory session of the GirlGeeks program, which we have been running for last 4 Saturdays, and this is specifically a program intended for women in engineering kind of a scenario, where we encourage girl students to participate in technological innovations and trending topics of technologies. So in this connection, we have come to the last session of this 4 Saturdays program, and we are now having the last session for today. So today's session is handled by Ms. Sangeeta from IBM. I heartily welcome Madam on behalf of the Department of Computer Science and Engineering, BMS Institute of Technology. I welcome Madam. And I also thank Dr. Sunanda Dikshit, Associate Professor, Department of CSE, for arranging this GirlGeeks program. It has been a flagship program in the IEEE Computer Society. I congratulate all the team members for conducting this particular session, and I also wish all the best for this particular session. Over to you, Rubini.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, I quickly now welcome Asif to introduce the speaker for the day, and then we can go ahead. Over to you, Asif.
Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope I'm audible.
Yeah, you are audible.
Yeah. So, with all the support and enthusiasm, we have finally reached the final session of the GirlGeeks program. So, the resource person for this particular track is Madam Sangeeta Shetty. She has a diverse profile. She's an accomplished information security professional with 20 plus years of IT experience, with a proven track record of successfully implementing complex, medium, large scale and IT security projects. She has a very interesting core professional competencies, which include enterprise security architecture, strategy and roadmap, data security, IoT security, endpoint security, network security, etc. She also has specialization in designing and implementing enterprise security solutions, security pre-sales, security strategy, vendor risk management, privacy, enterprise risk management, and so on. And she's currently working as cloud security architect in IBM Cloud Platform. She has very diverse responsibilities and managing thing. Without any further delay, I'll pass on to the ma'am. Over to you, ma'am.
Hello, everyone. So this is Sangeeta here. And am I audible, guys?
Yes, ma'am, you are audible.
Okay. So thank you, Sunanda and Anjan, for, actually inviting me to this session. So I'm really happy to be here. So I think Asif has already introduced myself, but just a little bit more in terms of my, background as well. I have actually done my master's in computer science, passed out in 97, and my initial entry into this IT industry was into mainframes. So up until 2006, where I was working with Wipro, I came across an opportunity to, face an external audit and represent Wipro from a standpoint of information security practices and how it is run, that sort of a thing. So that is where I started gaining interest into information security, and then that's where I would say my real security career has begun. So this is unlike other I would say a lot of people who are into, who have a focused, like beginning security career from the beginning. So I actually moved from mainframes, which is like a completely different kind of ball game altogether, into cloud computing, which is probably just the opposite side. So it's an interesting journey, and I really, the what I like about the cloud and cloud security and my profession is it always keeps you on the toes, and there's always so much to learn. And the more you learn, you realize that you really know very little, and there's much more to learn. And that's what keeps me going. So currently I'm working with the IBM cloud platform, and I am a cloud security architect, and I'm part of the risk and the governance function here. So that is a little bit about myself, and so let me start. So the topic for today is cloud computing and cloud security. And can we move on to the next slide? Yeah, thank you. So the agenda for today is, we completed the introduction. So what is cloud computing and the cloud computing taxonomy, the delivery models, and what really is driving the adoption of cloud, and why cloud computing is really required, how does it really help organization, and a little bit about the cloud computing vendors and the magic quadrant. How does really the world of compliance look like, what are the security challenges, and what are the key considerations for deployment, and so forth. So I think as we go into the slides, you'll realize that I have a story to tell. And just as a I just want to do the context setting here, that this is really about an overview, and just to get you all into getting a broad perspective of cloud and cloud security, and not really getting into the depth of it, because time is too short, and each topic in itself is very huge, I would say. So that being said, so let's move on to the next slide, which is about cloud computing. Can you move on to the next slide, please? Yeah. So if you look at fundamentally by NIST, NIST stands for National Institute of Standards and Technology, and this is how they define what a cloud computing is. So I have highlighted the the words in bold. So it is really about you're using something on demand, and it is a shared pool of resources. And it's the computing resources which are shared are actually from the service provider standpoint, or the network servers, storage applications, and so on, and the rapid provisioning. So these are sort of the core components, I would say, of cloud computing, and this is what a cloud computing is made up of. So it's a pool of, like, you have this servers which are available to you on demand, applications and everything is on demand, rapid elasticity, and there's a guaranteed level of service. So that in a nutshell is really about what a cloud computing is. So let's move on to the next slide. Now here it's really important to understand here, like what are the different kinds of cloud service delivery models, and what are the deployment models. There's essentially a difference between the two. And if you see here, let's talk about the deployment models first. So we have like public, private, hybrid, and community. I have not listed here the multi-cloud just for the sake of simplicity, but that is also something that is you would see upcoming in the in the future years. That is where the market is going to move. So talking about public cloud, it is basically an enterprise really using the public cloud services, and it is completely different from your enterprise IT. Enterprise IT or on-prem is really where the enterprise has a complete control on everything, the infrastructure, application, everything really, and that gives you really a great sense of security. So moving from there to the public cloud is where, like you have a lot of players in this space, which I have listed in the upcoming slides. But this is one of the deployment models, like the public one. And private is where everything is on your on-premise, basically. You have all the control. Nothing is in the, the cloud provider premises. It's completely, the cloud is set up inside your premise. The next is about the hybrid cloud, which is really a combination of the public and the private. And this is also a trend that we are seeing, that there's a huge market for hybrid cloud. And especially if you look at the financial services industry, that is where you would really find the highest level of the compliance requirements and the security requirements coming in. And that is where hybrid cloud is like a suitable use case for such stringent industries. And so essentially it's about a combination of public and private. Moving on to the community cloud, it is more about organizations collaborating and having a cloud to work with, and having a shared responsibility. So we will move on to next is about the delivery models for the cloud, which is software as a service, platform as a service, and infrastructure as a service. So the details about this delivery models is explained on the next slide in a little bit more detail, and that would be easier for us to explain it out there. And the key characteristics we have already covered in the earlier slide, which is really about on demand and and a guaranteed level of service, and you pay as you use. So these are certain key characteristics of a cloud. So let's move on to the next slide. Right. So if you look at it from the left to the right, this is your on-premise environment, and there's a different color code that you will see. So the blue color is really all the entire stack is really owned by the owned by you meaning the company itself, and everything in gray is something that is managed by the vendor. So as you move from private the private on premise to software as a service, you would realize the gray boxes are increasing. And if you see the software as a service, you would realize literally everything is controlled by the vendor as in the cloud service provider. So the entire stack. So what does typically an entire stack look like? It's basically your networking, storage, hardware, servers, all these databases, the framework for applications to run. This is what typically is made up of a cloud environment. And within your own enterprise, you would have a control of it. So if your cloud is set up within your own organization, this is what it would mean by a private cloud. And this would give you the highest level of control. There's nothing here that the cloud service provider actually controls in a private one. So as you move to the infra as a service, you would realize that right from networking up till servers, all these entire layers are really managed by the cloud service providers, and everything on top of it is actually the compute, storage, all those aspects are actually managed by the organization. Then moving on to the platform as a service, here is where the organization is only responsible for their own application, which they plan to host on a platform as a service provider. So the platform as a service provider will give you an application runtime environment in which you can actually deploy the application. And you as an organization really do not need to worry whether the application runtime framework is there available or not, will it work or not. You don't really need to bother about anything of that sort. So all you need to focus is only on your core application development. So platform as a service really frees you from the focus of looking at the environment in which the application runs to purely focusing on what really is needs to be the application functionality. So that's where the shift from the infra as a service to platform as a service is. And now when we move from platform as a service to software as a service, literally the entire stack is controlled by the cloud service provider. Minimalistically, you just need to get access and control access to that application, this SaaS application, to the list of people that you want to provide access based on role based access control mechanism. So this is like a really really simplistic view about the cloud service delivery models. And depending on the appetite of an organization, what kind of an organization you are, you might choose to go with one option or the other option, or a combination of all the options, for a specific set of applications that you have. So let's move on to the next slide. So this is an analogy of pizza as a service, just to make it simple to explain the the SaaS, PaaS, IaaS, and the on-prem models. So literally, what options do you have if you really feel like eating a pizza like today? If you really are interested, you have like the options of dining out, which is software as a service. Then platform as a service is really about you placing an order and you getting the pizza delivered to you. Take and bake is about really you have certain components in your house, but you also have to use certain components from outside, which is the cloud service provider, and then you combine, and then you have a you bake the pizza and then you eat it. And on-prem is literally like everything that you need to prepare a pizza, and to enjoy it, you everything you're responsible for. So this is just an analogy of pizza as a service, how we can just to make it simple for you guys to understand how it relates to infra as a service and the PaaS and the SaaS. So let's move on. We'll take the questions in the end because there's a little bit, a lot of topics to cover here. And then, whatever topics you have questions on, we can revisit those. And even outside of this subject, right? Like, I mean, now outside of this presentation, if you really need to know something, feel free to ask me. And whatever I know from my experience, I will definitely clarify your doubts to the extent that I'm aware. So coming to what really are the key drivers for organizations to move to cloud. So a lot of organizations, you'd realize, really have something called as a technical debt. I mean, it's a term used in industry. So it's about like a lot of hardware, maintaining that, keeping it up to date. So some of the challenges really are about those hardware reaching their end of life. Then even the data center, maybe it cannot support that much capacity. That is another challenge. Then disaster recovery, fault tolerance, high availability. Now this is about an organization itself, might not have its own data center, and really it might need to ensure that it needs a certain level of guarantee and availability of the applications or the the services. And that is why they move to cloud. So business continuity and disaster recovery itself is a huge topic in itself. But just to make you guys aware, disaster recovery and high availability itself, no, we are on the same slide, yeah. That itself is one of the biggest I would say key drivers which organizations have the need. Now it also, now cloud is really about saving capex cost. I mean, I'm sure you guys have heard about the term capex and opex. So it really helps the organizations not have the initial spend in the IT in spending on infrastructure, but rather using the cloud providers infrastructure and focusing on their core work. So it really helps in the cloud really helps in reducing those maintenance costs. So what we have listed here is about the high costs of maintenance that the organizations today have, and when they move to cloud, this cost will really reduce. So because it is, you pay only on demand and pay for how much you use, so, and that really helps. The other thing is about the speed of provisioning. Now I would like to take an example here. I was working prior to IBM. I was working with one of the organizations. It's a product company, and uh, by nature, because it's a product company, uh, I mean, they had a lot of clients, and during certain times of the year, they were having retail industry clients, and these retail industry clients, you would know that certain times of the year is where the really the spend, there's really need for those applications to be available online. Say for example in December, right? So where there is a huge surge in shopping, and really the infrastructure needs to be there to support that many concurrent users at any given point in time. So what used to happen in our organization was, during that period of the year, December, there used to be a huge planning effort to set up extra servers and really provision those applications to ensure that during that period that everything works smoothly, and once that period is over, then they used to be back to normal. So really looking at the spikes, like you sometimes you need a certain capacity. Without a cloud environment, it is really not possible with agility to handle the sudden spikes, and then the reduced consumption, and still reduce the cost. So that is really where, like, the speed of provisioning and saving costs is where the cloud comes into picture. So let's move on to the next slide now. Now again, like, this slide is really about how cloud computing helps an organization. I think while covering the previous slide only, I actually covered this topic as well. But just to reiterate, like, cloud service providers, they'll have really, data centers in multiple geographical locations in the world, and with really high, yeah, and have these data centers would be certified, and for compliance, we'll have cover compliance in the next slide. But just to reiterate that really cloud has, like, it gives you that elasticity and the scalability, quick provisioning, and no capex and opex charges really, and there is continuous monitoring and alerts. Yeah, so let's move on to the next slide, please. Now, what does this is like, the last year's survey, and this really tells about who are the top 5 cloud computing providers in terms of market share. Now, this data would have been really changed in 2021 because to a certain extent, because IBM is also one of the key vendors who is, you would have realized that it is spending a lot. I mean, it has declared itself as a um, cloud and AI organization. So huge spending on the cloud, and maturity of the cloud, and the security services. Security is one of the really top topics that we in IBM focus. So this was just to show you that, okay, who are those top 5 vendors based on the survey. Okay, let's move on to the next slide, please. Now, this is about the Magic Quadrant. So Gartner releases a Magic Quadrant periodically, and this is for their cloud infrastructure and platform as a service. So we discussed about infra as a service and platform as a service and SaaS in the previous slides. So as per Gartner, here is where the vendors are sort of ranked. So you have the leaders, challenges, and the niche players and the visionary. So so let's move on to the next slide. Right. So this slide is just to, not to really, I would say, just to give you a broad overview about compliance in different regions and why that is important. Because only then would we realize that how does really a cloud provider address these aspects. So if you look at, for example, in Europe, there is this GDPR. So that is really about protecting the rights of European citizens. And so the whole data privacy, I mean, based like in Europe, there is GDPR, in similar in other I would say geographies, similar data privacy laws are coming up. Now, it's really important for an organization that whichever is their core business, they need to comply with those regulations. So this is really about the regulatory authorities section of the slide is really about explaining, what are the different regulations across the globe that you need to be aware of, and depending on the business that the organization is into, it might need to meet those corresponding regulations. Say for example, in my previous org, which was a product based company, it was handling credit card data. So of its clients, and that is why it also needed to comply with PCI DSS, which is one of the global standards that I have written here, and really comply to all the requirements. Now each of these standards really would have its own requirements per se, and it's really, if you look at it, it is really humongous in terms of size and scope. So and just to explain one point here is about the financial industries. The financial industries would be the one which really have the highest level of regulations that are needed by any organization. And currently in IBM, we are building a financial services cloud, and to meet that cloud requirements, can somebody go on mute, please? Hello. Raja, can you go on mute? Thank you. So IBM is building the financial services industry, and Bank of America, BNPP are some of the top clients. And the depth of the controls that IBM Cloud really adheres to is about 268 controls from NIST. It is really I would say a big and a complex thing to achieve at such a great speed. So that was just to give you a flavor for what are the regulations here and what are the standards. Now there's something in the industry standards which is Cloud Security Alliance Privacy Shield. Privacy Shield is more about privacy related aspects. NIST is an organization which really releases various security related standards, and a lot of organizations adopt these standards because they are really widely used, I would say. Cloud Security Alliance is more focused on to security of your web applications. They release this top 10 list, and what are the risks and the countermeasures. So that kind of guidance comes from Cloud Security Alliance. Now SOC 1, SOC 2, SOC 3 is basically about, like you remember the Enron, right? I mean that is to avoid Enron like scenarios, is where the a SOC has come into picture, and organizations really have to ensure that they report to the regulatory authorities on a periodic frequency to attest that all the controls and the processes that they have are meeting the requirements. So let's move on to the next slide now. Right. This slide was mainly to, just to give you that although cloud is the way forward, what are the typical challenges? Now, this 247 billion market, this dollar value, if you would look at it today, it is even more. It runs into trillions. So this is where, like, cloud and cloud security really, um, every company is really upping their investments into digitalization and into cloud. So one or more of it, and it's a huge market that is out there, and it's really, it's just going to grow. There's no stopping it. So let's move on to the next slide, please. Right. So this slide is basically about the top threats, security threats that organizations might be worrying about when they are adopting a cloud. So, they might have concern about the data breaches, data loss, hijacking, denial of service, because there are a lot of state actors and, really hacktivists, all these different kinds of, I would say, threat vectors that are out there, and you could really have a denial of service because of that. So uh, all of this really, like, shared technology. Now, this is one of the fundamental thing about multi-tenancy. Whenever you think of cloud, one thing that really comes to mind is about how would the cloud vendor really secure the data at all levels, like having so this is about the threats. We will look at the countermeasures in a bit later in the upcoming slides, but this is only to give you a preview about what are the various security threats that a cloud service provider might be exposed to. So yeah, let's move on. This is about how does an organization really decide that which cloud deployment model is best for them. So certain questions that they really need to ask is around, what is the demand, how would be the growth, what are the security and privacy considerations, what are the kind of users, what is the volume of users, and performance. So if if there is a if there is an aspect of predictability in the growth, that is where they really go in for a private cloud and where there is stringent requirements. But if the applications that they are talking about which to move to cloud are really not that having stringent requirements, and it's less volume of users and stuff like that, they can really go to the public cloud directly. So this is about majorly about what an organization needs to consider while deploying the cloud models. And hybrid cloud really gives you the best combination of both the worlds. Let's move on to the next slide. Right. So this is a preview about, like, if you look at in today's world, you have, like, you have the cloud. Now you have this devices which are connected to the internet, which is the IoT thing. You have the mobile devices, your on premise, and you have users, applications, data. So if you look at the ecosystem, it is really like hybrid in nature, from the way the users consume it to the variety of devices that are used to connect to the cloud, to everything. So this is really about, bringing about the various aspects of, a hybrid world. Yeah, let's move on to the next slide, please. Right. So here we will cover certain aspects about security considerations in the cloud. Now, not it is really important to understand that in terms of data security is one of the key considerations, and not all data is really having the same level of, it doesn't demand the same level of security. So the level of security that you provide to the data is really dependent on the data classification. So something that is really, public information doesn't really need that level of protection, because by the very nature of data, it is something that could be consumed by the public. So as we move from the left to the right, from public, internal, confidential, and sensitivity, the level of security that you need to provide proportionately increases. So something like your driver's license, your SSN number, your financial assets, all that is really sensitive information, and it really needs the protection, as opposed to something that is like a press release. And so this is really to the key takeaway here is that security is really needs to be proportionate with respect to the classification of data, and not all data is of equal nature. Everything doesn't need equal level of security. You need to provide security based on data classification. So let's move on to the next slide, please. Right. Now, as we think about confidential and sensitive data, it is just not enough to say that the cloud provider, through its operational processes, will not access the data and the keys. It is really required for the cloud service provider to demonstrate that they have technical controls in place, which will give you the assurance that they really will not be able to touch your data. And here are certain key aspects to consider with respect to the data security itself, because data security is one of the absolutely key aspects to consider when moving to cloud. And we really need to think through about what are the key management options that the cloud service provider provides, whether they provide you provide you an option to bring your own keys, which is called as BYOK, or do they, whether you can manage your own keys. So this is an aspect that needs to be really considered. Now, there is also hardware based cryptographic key storage options that the cloud service providers provide, and that are really used for protecting your root keys, and really protecting it. So this is the other thing to consider here is also about the data at rest. I mean, obviously the data, what are the three states that the data can be? The data is either in rest, the data is either in transit, or the data is in use. So while the data is in any of these three states, it is really important that there are technical controls in place in addition to the process controls. So data encryption at rest is really something that is needed, and it should be available from the cloud service providers. In addition to that, they need to really provide you APIs to integrate your encryption and data protection with any service that you have designed and that you're planning to deploy in the cloud. So this is really about this whole slide. The key takeaway from this slide is about the importance of data security and, the bring your own key, keep your own key concepts. Let's move on to the next slide. Right. The other aspects to consider other than data security is about access control and monitoring and logging. Now, typically, a cloud service provider would have technical controls in place and operational processes to ensure that there is identity and access management. You have multi-factor authentication. Multi-factor authentication is basically about providing any of the three factors: what you know, who you are, and what you possess. So any of these two factors which you use in combination to really access would mean multi-factor authentication. So for example, biometric, I mean, the symbol shown here is that of a biometric, so even that could be combined. So in addition to a regular, you are always aware of username and password to access, like to authenticate, right? So in addition to username and password, if we introduce, say for example, a biometric authentication as well, then it really increases the security aspects from an authentication standpoint for that particular application, and it really helps. So that is about, the identity access management, multi-factor authentication, and obviously role-based access control. Role-based access control, in a nutshell, really means about you know granting access to people by grouping them into various roles. Now, everybody, for example, when you look at from let's take an example from a cloud service provider standpoint. Now you have this cloud service operators who would be able to, these operators could be, say for example, application operators, or operators who are managing the network or the servers or the storage. These are the folks who are one of the threat vectors for the from a security standpoint as well. So it is really important that whatever access they have, because the operators would really have the highest level of access to do administration activities. So all their activities really need to be monitored. And how will you be able to monitor? I mean, you need to really monitor their activities and ensure that they connect and perform their operations in a way which is really secure. What we mean by that is, not everybody, you cannot have operators, just operating from anywhere. You need to have a centralized point. Typically, it is called as a bastion host, in order for the operators to come in, and then from there go and administer the relevant server storage, whatever that might be. So this is really important, that the operator access from a cloud provider standpoint is done in a very secure way. So now all the cloud service providers would typically have a 24/7 running SOC. Now SOC stands for Security Operations Center. When you talk about Security Operations Center, it is basically about people, process, and technology. From a technology standpoint, SOC consists of SIEM technology, security incident and event monitoring, and rules and alerts will be configured on the SOC to generate alerts whenever there is any kind of malicious activity. Say, for example, uh, Sangeeta Shetty cannot log in from two different locations at the same time, or somebody is connecting to a bad IP. These are some of the use cases that are configured in the SIM technology, SIM technology, which is a part of the SOC. And SOC is something that a cloud service provider will provide. And you really need to also ensure that there is an audit trail of all the activities that is happening. Why audit trail and everything, all this is really important in order to really make a person accountable, and you really figure out after the fact that who did what. If you don't have the logs, then you would not be able to really figure out that who stole your data, right? So really logging, monitoring, these are very, very fundamental aspects from a security standpoint that you need to consider. Let's move on to the next slide, please. So this slide really covers about the network security and the configuration management. Now, network security. Now, there's a term in cyber security which is called as defense in depth. What defense in depth really means is, no single security control is enough to protect you. You need to have a combination of detective control, preventive control, corrective controls in place in order for you to have a secure mechanism. So at the core, you would realize that there is data, and then you have the host security, then you have the network security, so and the edge security. So really network security would really, cover, just to give you a simplistic example, aspects such as DDoS protection. Why DDoS protection? Because otherwise, whichever are your internet facing servers, if you do not have the DDoS protection in place, any internet user, like, malicious user, they can end up, conducting an attack. And really, like, I mean, I want to talk less about the security breaches, because we want to look at more from a solution standpoint rather than talking about the issues. So really, this is about having DDoS protection in place and ensuring that while data is passed through your network, it is protected. You also have solutions like a web application firewall, which are behavioral based. You can configure rules which are behavioral based, and get insight into it, and you can detect and prevent the attacks at the network layer. And in addition to this is in addition to the regular network security stuff, which is having firewalls, your IDS, intrusion detection system, intrusion prevention system. All of these are, like, the security components from a technology standpoint, which fit into this group called as network security. Now also the connectivity to the network. How are you connecting from the network? Whether it is from office, whether you're connecting from home, is it through this VPN? Which is the device that you use to connect to VPN? Like, is your host secure? So really, that's all. These are all the considerations that are, really need to be thought through when you talk about network security. Moving on to configuration management. Now, uh, from a configuration management, you typically have organizations such as, like, the CIS, which provides benchmarks. Now what these benchmarks are is basically about, let's take for example a Linux based server. It could be based on Debian, it could be Ubuntu. Now there are these benchmarks which are provided by CIS, which say that if you are on Ubuntu, then these are the settings that you need to configure. Something to do with, do not ensure the root access is enabled. Root will have the highest level of access, so ensure that you run your stuff as non-root. So this is just an example, just to make you give you a very brief preview of, okay, this is, the benchmark really consists about all this good security settings that need to be in place. And there are various tools which will have this benchmarks integrated. And when they are doing, like, the like you do vulnerability scanning, you have tools such as Nessus which do vulnerability scanning, and they will tell you that a particular server or a network device really has all these vulnerabilities. You have different obviously you have different vendors and different tool sets that you use for scanning different elements of your I would say IT setup. So because a single tool will not suffice everything, so you have various combination of tools. So you have tools for vulnerability scanning databases, scanning applications. Now in terms of scanning applications, you have something called as security SAST. SAST is about security application security testing. So you have tools which test your code base, or your application that you have written. The SAST tools will really do a scan on the security scan on the code base to ensure that it has no vulnerabilities. So when you talk really about this configuration management area, it is about checking security from the the server, the network, the device, the application, the database, literally everything. So let's move on to the next slide. Yeah, this might be a little older version, but I just wanted to give you a preview about the cloud security landscape. And there are various vendors out there for different kinds of security solutions. And security in itself is a vast subject, and different vendors have different they provide different capabilities. So this was just to give you a flavor. Now, again, organizations who adopt cloud typically would also look for solutions such as cloud access security broker. Say, for example, I am an organization, and uh, I am using two clouds, say AWS, as well as certain applications I want to host on AWS, and certain applications I'm hosting on Google Cloud. Now, across this multi cloud environment, I really need to ensure that there are data security policies that are implemented. So, how really I can do that? If I have a solution like such as a cloud access security broker, then it really helps me applying the same set of security policies through that solution to the multiple clouds setup that I have, and monitor from a single pane of glass. So I just gave you that as an example of one of the solutions that an organization would look for when they move to the cloud. So there are various other solutions that are needed, but this is just to give you a preview. Let's move on to the next slide, please. Right. So this really is about, what is the road ahead from now. Although the cloud really has certain set of challenges such as regulatory and stuff like that, I would really say that the cloud is here to stay, and it is here to grow, and really grow massively. So cloud, whether to move to cloud or not move to cloud, is really not an option per se. It is the way of life. That is what I would like to summarize it. And you know generally it is said that um, you know uh, every cloud has a silver lining. I would say that cloud itself is a silver lining to the organizations, because the pace at which the cloud service providers are upgrading their services in order to help organizations meet their business objectives is really immense. So that so Sunanda, I think we will move to the question and answer session now.
Yes, ma'am. So I hope everyone would have got a glimpse of cloud security and cloud computing in the world. So yeah, now we can move on. Participants, you all can shoot your questions or unmute your mics and ask questions to ma'am.
Hello, ma'am. Am I audible?
Yes, you're audible,
Yes,
Akshit.
yes, ma'am. Ma'am, my question is, we currently in the COVID situation, we all moved to the remote working area, or to the remote working stations. So
Mhm.
how can we properly monitor the cloud security solutions? Because when we were not remote, we can define a particular workspace, or we can define some particular devices that a person can access our cloud architecture from this hardware. And if the request is coming from any other server, from any other source, we can block that request. But in the remote solutions, we can't do that so much effectively. No.
See, Akshit, the point is about the asset that you use to connect to your enterprise, right? You do it over a VPN. Now, on the VPN itself, you can configure policies to say that if a particular asset does not have this minimum level of security, don't allow that asset to connect itself. So there are, different solutions, like, available, that you and mechanisms that you could implement it. But all the assets that you would typically use are enterprise assets, right? So those assets are owned by the company. And when an asset is owned by a company, then be it a workstation or a server, they would have security controls applied on it, a host based firewall. Then depending on, who is the user of that, they might end up putting additional controls, to see what activities are being performed by the user. Say for example, a very sensitive user, right? Like I took the example of an let's take an example of a person who handles credit card data, right? So it's really important to monitor every action that that person does using that asset. So the organizations will ensure that there is recording feature available, for such users, wherein it will record every, actually do a recording of every activity, and really monitor all those stuff. So really it's about, you using that, having controls in place to ensure that that asset which you use to connect to the network is secure, and put controls in place at the network standpoint to ensure that an asset which does not meet a minimum level of security is not allowed to connect to the network itself. So it's possible.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, ma'am. This is Shaman.
Yes, Shaman.
So I had a doubt regarding the vulnerability scanning. So since you said about Nessus, or
Yeah.
we have Nmap, Metasploit, and Burpsuit. So on cloud infrastructure, like, can't we enable something like NetFlow by, like, since we have like Cisco's has a NetFlow thing, can we implement IPS or an IDS like for detection and prevention system, so we can make it more secure, like in each sector?
Absolutely. Yeah. See, now if you let me give you a perspective, like, within a cloud security, like, providers organization itself, you would have different teams. One, like, I want to talk about the teams also, just to give you a flavor. The tools that you mentioned, right, like, the Metasploit and stuff, which are the tools typically used by pen testers, to really, look at. Now when we look at a cloud service provider organization, they will have like multiple teams. One is like a blue team. The blue team's responsibility is like ensure that all the assets are secure, everything is secure. Now
Yeah.
you have something like a red team. A red team's job is to ensure that you end up proactively using tools. You try to ensure that you find out weaknesses in the systems. This is the job of a red team. And red team really is, like, I would say, within any organization, is the most highly skilled set of people is what you would find in the red team, because um, uh, they are the ones who the organization heavily relies on to say that, hey, help me understand, by executing pen tests. Now, given the scale of the organization, not the pen test team cannot conduct for every other application. What they will do is, like, the organization will have a certain scope given to the pen testers itself. They can in additionally hire external organizations for performing the pen testing activity and giving out report.
Bug bounty.
Yeah, correct. Right. Bug bounty is also one of the mechanisms. Bug bounty mechanism is more about, like, an organization says, hey, proactively, like, they are saying that if you report a vulnerability on, our infrastructure, then we give you X. I mean, sometimes it is mostly, in most cases, associated with some, money also that they will give. But that is also one of the ways that organization uses to really ensure that there is a stress test conducted from a security standpoint for all their assets, and to really ensure that they are working on them. Now, in terms of coming to the solution standpoint, like you have a variety. Now, if you look at a typical infrastructure standpoint, right? Like what are the things that could be there? You have network, you have servers, like you have physical servers, you have VMs, you have containers. I didn't speak about containers because again, that is also another big topic, like cloud native applications and containers and stuff like that. So you really you need to have tools, databases. So you need to have a combination of tools which specialize in scanning that kind. Now you can do like if you talk about, let's take for example code. Now code, you have multiple. If you have coded in say Go language, or you have coded in Node.js, whatever be the code, source code in which you're coding, you really need to have scanning tools that can scan your static code. You need to have dynamic application security testing tools. What would that tools help you with? When you are running the application, that means when your application is in execution, it is in runtime, it can detect whether there are any security issues. So this is like, from a code standpoint, during for static scanning, dynamic scanning, there is also something called as dependency scanning. Now you would see that right now the trend is like organizations really use, like at least IBM uses a lot of open source, right? So when IBM is developing certain services using the open source libraries, those libraries itself can be vulnerable. So it is really required that you have something called as dependency scanning. So there is a whole gamut, if you were to look at it, that in terms of the areas that you look at. Now database scanning, now you need to scan for database vulnerabilities. You have various solutions in the market. You can also do database activity monitoring. The intent of database activity monitoring is really to ensure that whatever activities database administrators are doing is really captured and alerts are generated. So where would you want to use database activity monitoring? Wherever your key financial data is, or some other key data is. You would not really use it for anything and everything, but you use it for really, based on the data classification for those critical databases. So that is where DAM comes into picture. So, and um, again, the way you like, the whole gamut of tools that are out there is really, is really huge out there. For containers, you really need to have separate set of scanning solutions. Your traditional NSS will not be able to scan containers, so you need to have separate scanning solutions for those. So that's just to give you a broad overview, Shamant. I hope I answered your question.
Oh, yes, ma'am. Thank you. And just one more career-oriented question.
Yes.
So basically, like I want to pursue mine in security itself. So
Mhm.
I'm actually attending my CEH. So I want to
Mhm.
do my CCNP and CCIE security.
Hmm.
So like, do you have any advice regarding it? Like,
Fantastic, actually. I would say, like, see, when you look at security, right, there are various ways you can enter into, the cyber security field, right? I mean, one is like, how do certain people enter into security? Maybe they were a server admin first and then they entered into security. Maybe they were a network admin, they entered into network security. Somebody was into application development, then ended up doing security from an application security standpoint. So look at it, I would say, going at it from the, it is a personal choice with respect to how you want your career to grow in a particular domain. uh, you definitely, one, as a security professional, you need to have a broader understanding of the various technologies, but you need to have one specialization. So it's like, you know a broad area of, like, okay, what are the various domains of security, but then you also want to specialize in one particular area, which is what differentiates you from the other people. So I would say, looks like you have an interest towards network security. And yes, I mean, there is no, I would say, good or bad about anything. It is about a choice that you want to pursue and your area of interest. So definitely CCI and you pursuing CES would definitely help. I would say it would go for it, and wish you good luck.
So I need to like have a specialization, for example, like cloud
Yeah,
and networks or anything as such.
right. I mean, see, I would say you cannot do everything of everything. Like, if you say, okay, does Sangeeta know everything about pen testing? Has she conducted pen test? I would say no. But do you understand pen test? Do you know what tools are used? Do you know the framework? Yes, I know. So really it is about a choice, and you need to pursue based on your choice, how you want to plan your career, because there are different kinds of specializations. But let me tell you, like, say for example, if you're working for an organization, say, which is like using AWS, then having knowledge about AWS would help. Now if you're currently, assume that you are students who are really yet to find their job, then, and you want to pursue your career in cloud security, then you can go for vendor neutral certifications. You can go for CCSK, so which is vendor neutral. Now every cloud provider, right, like be it IBM, your AWS, your Azure, they have come up with their own certification programs, and they have a career path defined. I would say it would be good if you do some vendor neutral certification, so that you can demonstrate that you have a broad understanding of cloud security, and then move on to any one vendor specialization, depending on, that is what is the need of the hour, depending on the job, the place where you work, or if you're planning to start your own business, depends. So yeah.
Thank you, man. Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
Thank you, ma'am. I hope the participants got cleared their doubts, and I couldn't see any more questions in the chat box. And if anyone else have any other question, you can unmute your mics and ask. Thank you so much, ma'am, for spending your time with us, and amidst your busy schedule. It was great having you here with us, ma'am. It was really a great informative session, ma'am.
Yeah. Thank you, Sunanda, Anjan, Robini, and the entire team. Thank you so much.
Thank you.